Russian President Vladimir Putin said in a televised address that he has decided to conduct a special military operation in Donbas under the pretense of demilitarizing the neighboring nation. He claimed it's intended to protect civilians, and he called the Russian army peacekeeping forces. In a televised address, Putin said the operation comes in response to threats coming from Ukraine. He added that Russia doesn't have a goal to occupy all Ukraine. Putin said the responsibility for bloodshed lies with the Ukrainian government. Putin warned other countries that any attempt to interfere with the Russian action would lead to consequences they have never seen. He accused the US and its allies of ignoring Russia's demand to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO and offer Moscow security guarantees. He said the Russian military operation aims to ensure a demilitarization of Ukraine. Putin said that all Ukrainian servicemen who lay down arms will be able to safely leave the zone of combat. There was no immediate reaction from the White House to Putin's remarks, but US officials have repeatedly pledged to place overwhelming sanctions on the Russian economy and Putin allies in retaliation for a further invasion of Ukraine. Big explosions were heard before dawn in Kyiv, Kharkiv and Odessa as world leaders decried the start of an invasion that could cause massive casualties and topple Ukraine's democratically elected government. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky declared martial law, saying Russia has targeted Ukraine's military infrastructure. He urged Ukrainians to stay home and not to panic. In the capital, Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko advised residents to stay home unless they are involved in critical work and to prepare go-bags with necessities and documents if they need to evacuate. An Associated Press photographer in Mariupol reported hearing explosions and seeing dozens of people with suitcases heading for their cars to leave the city. The Russian military said it struck Ukrainian air bases and other military assets and had not targeted populated areas. The Russian Defense Ministry statement said the military was using precision weapons and claimed that there is no threat to civilian population. The Kremlin said rebels in eastern Ukraine asked Russia for military assistance to help fend off Ukrainian attacks, an announcement that immediately fueled fears that Moscow was offering up a pretext for war, just as the West had warned. A short time later, the Ukrainian president rejected Moscow's claims that his country poses a threat to Russia and said a Russian invasion would cost tens of thousands of lives. President Volodymyr Zelensky said in an emotional overnight address, speaking in Russian in a direct appeal to Russian citizens that the people of Ukraine and the government of Ukraine want peace. But if we come under attack, if we face an attempt to take away our country, our freedom, our lives and lives of our children, we will defend ourselves. When you attack us, you will see our faces, not our backs. Zelensky said he asked to arrange a call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, but the Kremlin did not respond. In an apparent reference to Putin's move to authorize the deployment of the Russian military to maintain peace in eastern Ukraine, Zelensky warned that this step could mark the start of a big war on the European continent. He said, any provocation, any spark could trigger a blaze that will destroy everything. He challenged the Russian propaganda claims, saying that you are told that this blaze will bring freedom to the people of Ukraine, but the Ukrainian people are free. The United Nations Security Council quickly scheduled an emergency meeting at Ukraine's request. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba called the separatists' request a further escalation of the security situation. Anxiety about an imminent Russian offensive against its neighbor soared after Putin recognized the separatist region's independence on Monday, endorsed the deployment of troops to the rebel territories and received parliamentary approval to use military force outside the country. The West responded with sanctions.
We don't want to be next to a new Cold War. Actually, this is something that we never wanted, and we don't want it now.
Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said the rebel chiefs wrote to Putin on Wednesday, pleading with him to intervene after Ukrainian shelling caused civilian deaths and crippled vital infrastructure. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the separatists' request for Russian help was an example of the sort of false flag operation that the US and its allies have expected Moscow to use as a pretense for war. She said, "So we'll continue to call out what we see as false flag operations or efforts to spread misinformation about what the actual status is on the ground." Earlier in the day, Ukrainian lawmakers approved a decree that imposes a nationwide state of emergency for 30 days starting Thursday. The measure allows authorities to declare curfews and other restrictions on movement, block rallies and ban political parties and organizations in the interests of national security and public order. The action reflected increasing concern among Ukrainian authorities after weeks of trying to project calm. The Foreign Ministry advised against travel to Russia and recommended that any Ukrainians who are there leave immediately. "For a long time, we refrained from declaring a state of emergency, but today the situation has become more complicated," Ukrainian National Security and Defense Council head Oleksiy Danilov told Parliament, emphasizing that Moscow's efforts to destabilize Ukraine represented the main threat. Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby said the Russian force of more than 150,000 troops arrayed along Ukraine's borders is in an advanced state of readiness. He said, "They are ready to go right now." The latest images released by the Maxar satellite image company showed Russian troops and military equipment deployed within 10 miles of the Ukrainian border and less than 50 miles from Ukraine's second-largest city, Kharkiv. Another wave of distributed denial-of-service attacks hit Ukraine's parliament and other government and banking websites on Wednesday, and cybersecurity researchers said unidentified attackers had also infected hundreds of computers with destructive malware. Officials have long said they expect cyber attacks to precede and accompany any Russian military incursion, and analysts said the incidents hew to a nearly two-decade-old Russian playbook of wedding cyber operations with real-world aggression. In other developments, Russia evacuated its embassy in Kyiv, Ukraine recalled its ambassador to Russia and considered breaking all diplomatic ties with Moscow, and dozens of nations further squeezed Russian oligarchs and banks out of international markets. President Joe Biden allowed sanctions to move forward against the company that built the Russia to Germany Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, and against the company's CEO. Biden said, "As I have made clear, we will not hesitate to take further steps if Russia continues to escalate." Germany said that it was indefinitely suspending the project, after Biden charged that Putin had launched the beginning of a Russian invasion of Ukraine by sending troops into the separatist regions. The pipeline is complete but has not yet begun operating. Actually, Putin said Tuesday that he had not yet sent any Russian troops into the rebel regions, contrary to Western claims, and Donetsk rebel leader Denis Pushilin insisted Wednesday there were no Russian troops in the region, even though a local council member claimed the previous day they had moved in. Already, the threat of war has shredded Ukraine's economy and raised the specter of massive casualties, energy shortages across Europe, and global economic chaos. European Union sanctions against Russia took effect, targeting several companies along with 351 Russian lawmakers who voted for a motion urging Putin to recognize the rebel regions, and 27 senior government officials, business executives, and top military officers. The Russian Foreign Ministry has shrugged off the sanctions, saying that Russia has proven that, with all the costs of the sanctions, it is able to minimize the damage. In Ukraine's east, one Ukrainian soldier was killed and 6 more wounded after rebel shelling, the Ukrainian military said Wednesday. Separatist officials reported several explosions on their territory overnight and 3 civilian deaths. Facing a barrage of criticism at the 193-member United Nations General Assembly, Russia's UN ambassador, Vasily Nebenzia, warned Ukraine that Russia will monitor a ceasefire in the east and emphasized that no one intends to go softly with any violators. After weeks of rising tensions, Putin's steps this week dramatically raised the stakes. He recognized the independence of the separatist regions, a move he said extends even to the large parts of the territories now held by Ukrainian forces, and had parliament grant him authority to use military force outside the country. Putin laid out 3 conditions that he said could end the standoff, urging Kyiv to renounce its bid to join NATO, to partially demilitarize, and to recognize Russia's sovereignty over Crimea, the Black Sea Peninsula that Moscow annexed from Ukraine in 2014.